Okay, in this video we're going to assume that you are comfortable with the Apple user interface. You know how to go through Finder and find files and create directories and stuff like that, and that you know how to launch programs. So we're going to work with a piece of video. There's a video clip I've got that I've generated here, and I'm just going to quickly play it. I'm going to run it with QuickTime. And it's basically some footage we shot around the doghouse. Some footage with people talking. I need to give the. I'm gonna scrub through it.
Go ahead and label all. Yeah, I finished my script. 2 years later.
It'll.
So it's a bunch of footage shot in the doghouse. And what we're going to do is we're going to take it into Final Cut, cut a few chunks out of it, assemble it into a timeline, and encode it. And so let's take a look at that. So first off, we need to run Final Cut. And Final Cut may appear on the toolbar at the bottom. If it's not there, you can always go to Launchpad and run it from there. And Final Cut may take a little while to come up because if you have a bunch of external hard drives and it has assets that are in those hard drives, it may need to get those drives to spool up. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to skip through a few of these updates on my laptop. There's a bunch of things that need updating. I'm going to skip doing that for now. And we'll take a quick look at the Final Cut user interface. So the Final Cut user interface, this is what we call the default user interface. And if at some point you're experimenting with changing the layout of the user interface and you decide you want to move stuff around, you can go to Window, Workspaces, and click on Default, and it'll wind up going back into this default workspace. And the way the Final Cut user interface works is on the left-hand side of the default workspace is the library sidebar. Every library you open, the library and its collections, the events and other pieces that make up that library show up on this left sidebar over here. To the right of that library sidebar is what's called the event browser. Events, as we mentioned, are kind of like bins where you collect media assets that you're going to use in your edit. And that's kind of where your timelines that you're editing also land. And so in here, in this area that I'm looking at, is where the event browser is. In this case, there's a library I have open called Footage Rotate, and I'm going to click on the event 11.4.21, and it looks like there's one thing in here. Actually, that's two things in here. This view is one that I don't like, and so I tend to go up here and look at the item view by clicking on this. I can go back and forth between that. And this I like better because I can actually see everything at a glance. And in this case, this is telling us with this icon here that I'm looking here at a video clip. If I click on this, I can kind of go through and see what's on that video clip. And then over here, this is an actual project, or what we call a timeline. We mentioned that the terminology of Final Cut says that a project in Final Cut is a timeline inside of which you lay out clips and make out the video you're kind of trying to put together. And we said that a library, which is this thing over here, is a place where the assets you're going to use for your video and the timelines or the projects that are in there are placed where you can organize them in bins that are called events. And that's an event. This is a library, this is an event, and this is what's inside that event. Onto the right of the event browser is the viewer. And the viewer is kind of like a video window, and it will show you whatever you're looking at as a video object. And so sometimes you may be looking at a timeline, and you'll be able to see what's in that timeline in the viewer. And sometimes you're looking at a video clip, and you'll be able to see what's in that video clip in the viewer. To the right of that and towards the other edge of the screen is the inspector, and anything you're looking at will show up in the inspector. And the inspector lets you figure out, depending on the type of asset you're looking at, various attributes about it. And so, like this is about the sound of that asset, the audio part of that asset. This thing tells us information about that asset, including like what resolution it is and what frame rate it's running at. And this gives you a place where you can put things like title attributes or attributes to this clip if you want. And this typically tells you if there's any video effects or video settings on the video part of this clip. We'll get to that much later, and certainly at the beginning, you're not going to spend a lot of time worrying about what's in this area. A lot of your action is going to happen here, which is the timeline view. This is kind of where you take a project and start looking at what's in it, and you can add footage to it, you can modify footage in it, and you can delete things from it. And when a project which you're laying out in the timeline is ready, you can take that project and render it in Final Cut, which Final Cut calls sharing. So that's the user interface, the default user interface. As I mentioned, it is possible to readjust it. You can have this showing up on different screens if you have multiple heads, and you can decide, whether you want to have dual viewers and things like that. For the purposes of this video, we're thinking of the default layout and doing some very basic editing. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new library. And to do that, I'm going to go into Final Cut's menu and go into New and create New Library. And at that point, I get a pop-up that basically says, where do you want to create this library and what do you want to call it? In this case, there is a home folder thing that I've got here called Movies. I'm going to create my test video on here. My recommendation is when you're doing experiments, don't put it on the default home directory on the VideoCat Mac Pro. Go onto one of those external hard drives. We'll probably tell you which one is safe and has space for you to experiment with, and create a folder in there and put your libraries in there. I'm going to call this my first test library. And I said I was creating this in the movies folder in my home directory. And so I'm going to click save on this. And just for grins, I am going to fire up another file browser. And I'm going to go to the movies area and look at this directory and directories in there and see, hey, my first test library FCP bundle. This is that Final Cut library that I just created. And at this point, there's nothing in it, and it only takes up about 181K. So back to here, we've opened a brand new library. The first thing we want to do now is let's pull a clip in. I'm going to pull that clip up. I mentioned, gosh, I have a clip that I want to use for this video. I can do a couple of things, but the most easiest thing to do is to simply first make sure that I have the event I have open. And so I've just created a new library called my first test library. And when I created it, it came with a bin that was named for the date it was created in. And that's whenever you create a library, it comes with an event that's named by the date that library was created in. You can create new events in there if you want to organize your footage into different bins, so to speak. Unless you have a ton of footage, I just usually toss everything into that one default event. And so I'm going to go back and pop back into the file browser. And now I'm going to drag that footage that I want to use in my video into the event. And over here, this kind of tells you if the program is doing something in the background. It probably momentarily woke up a bit, kind of showed some activity and went away, because right now this moved really fast. It's not a very large file. And you can see here that this is the clip I've pulled through. I can hit the space bar. I can land my playhead anywhere on this clip, and if I hit the space bar, it starts playing. Kind of like that. And I can go to some other spot in here and press play.
How the printers are doing is last couple days.
I can turn on something here called audio skimming, video and audio skimming. And by turning that on, when I move over here, it's kind of scrubs along with me and lets me kind of preview the video that's showing up in here. So now what I'm going to do is, this is a piece of footage, and I'm going to grab pieces from it. And so what I want to do now is I want to make a project or a timeline that I can start putting stuff into. So what I do is I stay in this event, and I can go up here to the menu and go New Project. And this window here pops up. Now before I go much further, one thing it's worthwhile looking at is if you're working with different bits of media, what kind of media are you working with? So I'm going to click cancel on this. I'm going to go to the video the clip that I imported into this library, and I'm going to go into the inspector area and take a look at what it thinks it is. And it says, gosh, this is a 4K video clip running at 30 frames per second. It is 3840 by 2160, which is your typical UHD resolution. And so, okay, so I could choose to, when I'm creating my timeline that I'm going to use to edit the footage into, and let's call it my first timeline. I could treat it as 4K. There's other options. You can kind of, you have all these other resolutions you can turn your timeline into. And what this is doing is my source footage is at 4K, and the timeline I'm going to create is at 4K also. Final Cut Pro is very forgiving, and so if you make a timeline whose native resolution is lower than the source footage you are going to pull into it, it's just going to scale it down. And if you create a timeline that is a higher resolution than the footage you're going to toss into it, it will probably scale it up if you intend it to, or it may stay small and you may have to do some scaling. Since I'm working with 4K here, I'll just stay with 4K. In the case of the brain dumps, what we'll probably do is, we'll turn the timelines, we'll create the timelines as 1080p timelines. And so you can kind of see that this is what the resolution for this project I'm creating is going to be. For rendering, there's a lot of different codecs out there that Final Cut works with, which is based on Apple's ProRes codec. My recommendation for now is just to take the standard ProRes 422 codec and use that as the native codec. And that's basically the native rendering or shall I say encoding codec that this video is going to be generated in. Now, you're going to be able to generate these and turn them into other types of video formats using some other tools that work with Final Cut. So I'm going to click OK, and a new timeline now appears. And in the timeline browser, which is down here, that project is now listed here. Notice it says My First Timeline. And there's nothing in it, so there's really nothing to show. And as I scrub through it over here, there's really nothing to see in the viewer pane that's over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to that Descats area here and decide what I want to do with it. So a couple of things I can do. So right now, this entire clip is selected, because you can see this yellow outline around it. And one thing I can do, if I want to take this and load it straight into here, this is the kind of the big, there's nothing in this timeline. I can just go here, select it, which is this entire thing here. And if I hit the W key, it will take what is selected in the event viewer or event browser, and it will drop this into the timeline. So I'm just going to type the lowercase w key. And notice what happened. It just loaded this sucker into here, and that entire clip is in here. That's a really easy way if you have to just drag a clip and pop it into there. Now I'm going to hit Command Z to undo what I just did. And so Command Z undoes whatever you did in macOS. And so if you did something and you experimented with it and you said, hey, I don't want to do that, you can Command Z it and undo what you just did. Another possibility here is I can click here. I click on a spot here. I'm going to scrub over here and say, okay, here's the folks kind of looking at a piece of paper on here. I want to set this as the part that I want to start grabbing this clip from. And to do that, I type the letter I, lowercase I, and you notice that the start of the selected area now moves to here. Now I'm going to press the space bar to play the clip.
Two of them. So you guys should each close one. Were there any break locks, Bean? Did you cover?
Okay. I'm going to stop it about here. Looks like I had these two on camera for a second or two, and then I dropped down to the piece of paper, and then I started panning across to the folks at the front of the desk. And at this point, I'm going to stop. I'm going to say, okay, that's the length of the clip I want to pull. I'm going to type the O key, and that sets the out point, and that sets up this zone. So the I key sets up the input point. The O key sets up the output point, and that defines like a sub piece of this clip that I can now use. Now that this subsidiary clip piece here is selected, I can type W, and that goes down into the timeline. You can watch. I can just play this back in the timeline now. This is just a piece I pulled.
Two of them. So you guys should each close one. Were there any break locks?
Now, there's all kind of scrunched away to the side, and I want to stretch this out a little. So what you do is you go over here. You see this piece over here. This is the appearance of clips in the timeline. It lets you stretch the relative time so that you can get into more fine-grained resolution as you're working on clips. So I'm going to go here, and this top slider at the top is what sets up how big it is scaled to your screen. And I'm just going to crunch this down so I have enough of this kind of filling the screen. And so I'm just going to scrub across to here, play it back a little.
So you guys should each close one.
And there's something kind of interesting about this thing. This timeline is called the magnetic timeline. If you insert things in front of it, the timeline pushes everything else to the right. If you put stuff at the back, it just sticks it on the back. So I'm going to grab another chunk of footage. Maybe I'm going to do this clip here, where I kind of just did sort of like a jib down with my phone. And now I've selected this subclip. Now if I take my edit point and I move it to the beginning of the timeline, I go up here to the selected clip and I type W. Take a look at what happened. Now I'm going to compress this timeline a bit so we can now see what we did. This new subclip, or I don't want to say subclip, but let's say this new portion of the clip that I grabbed using the W key just dropped straight down into here. Now I can undo this. And there's another way you can do this, and that is I can just drag this guy, and you notice this clip starts showing up in the timeline view. And now I can push it in front of this clip, and you notice the clip that was there now pushes off to the right. That's what the magnetic timeline is about. And it kind of goes like this.
Two of them. So you guys should each close one.
Now, I may decide, well, that this is taking a long time. I'd like to cut into this about here. If that's the place I want to kind of cut in, I can grab this clip and click the left mouse button. And notice where my mouse cursor changes to something like this. That means that it's one of the handles on the edge of this clip. I can hold the left mouse button down, and now as I move to the right, it shortens the clip until it comes up to here. So now this is where the timeline begins. And I'm going to say, oh, that's plenty good for me. And I'm going to say, all right, now I want to make this clip shorter by just dragging this part over. I use the left mouse button or the left side of the mouse, if it's an Apple Magic Mouse, to do that. So now I've trimmed that footage. So now you've learned a bit about trimming, selecting parts of clips, loading them into the timeline, and adjusting their size. At that point, I'm thinking, yeah, that's plenty good. And now I'm going to do something different. Now, notice my cursor is this little arrow thing. I can, at any point in time, cut a clip that's in the timeline. And to do that, I type the B key. And the minute I hit the B key, this little blade thing comes out. And if I move it over to this spot and I click on it, and then I move this aside, you're going to see that, hey, I've made a cut over here. Now, one of the reasons why it kind of snaps like this is I've also set a thing called snapping on. Snapping lets whatever operation you're doing kind of snap to the closest clip edge that it can find. Now, what's kind of interesting about this is that now I can move a little forward from here. And now this is where I kind of zoomed in a bit, or at least I moved the camera forward a bit. I'm going to make another clip mark here. And now I type the A key. So the B key, remember, turns you into cut mode. The A key turns you back into point and select mode. And so now I can go and select this clip by clicking on it. And then I can hit the delete key and delete it. And now you notice the magic timeline is, and now the magnetic timeline pulls this back to the left and fills in that hole. So now if you look at it,
Are there any brake locks being? Did you?
and now if I wanted to trim this a bit, because my camera starts moving a bunch, it can move it to about there.
Any brake locks being?
So that should give you a bit of a sense of how this works. So at this point, we've talked about creating a library. We've imported a clip. We made a project, a timeline. We loaded some footage into the timeline. We've shown you some examples of the magnetic timeline, showed you some cutting, some trimming, some moving stuff, and about how you can stretch the timeline so that you can kind of see what you're doing. Now, as you add more and more clips, you can move this timeline to the left and right. So like if you make this really big so that you can really do fine-tune, frame by frame work, you can just kind of scroll back and forth through here. And what is cool about the Magic Mouse, is that the top of the Magic Mouse, especially the front top of the Magic Mouse, is a scroll wheel. It's just by touch. And so by just moving your fingers to the left and right, you can basically scroll left and right. Now let's take a look at the audio. I'm going to make this a little shorter. So you notice you can kind of see the audio levels over here, kind of like the audio waveforms. And I want to make these, the timeline kind of thicker, the tracks on the timeline thicker, so I can see them a little better. And so over here you'll notice that this slider at the bottom makes them a little fatter, so I can see the audio waveforms a little better. And so you can kind of see now as I play it back.
Are there any brake locks being?
So if I pick this clip here, and I go into the inspector, and I go into that little speaker icon in here, that gives me a sense of the audio characteristics of that clip, and it shows me, obviously the audio levels are not very high. You can hear Sheep's voice, but it's not very loud. If I want to, there's a bit of gain I can add, and as you notice, as I increase the gain, the audio waveforms rise up a bit. And at this point, it gets all the way to the top, and Sheep's voice is not carrying very, very well, and so it's not super loud, but it's going to be louder than before.
Are there any brake locks being?
But you notice that this one did not change because the only audio clip that I did the gain adjustment was in here. So I could go into this audio clip and go into its inspector area and increase its gain to 100% also.
Are there any break locks being?
So you can kind of see that. Now, what's kind of interesting is that you notice the audio clips, or shall I say, the audio waveforms and the video are glued together in the clip. Now, there's something very interesting you can do where you can split out the audio from the clip itself so that you can extend or contract just the audio part. If you don't know what that means, let's take a quick look at it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go up here to Clip and go and select Detach Audio. Now look what just happened here. The audio waveform turned into something that looks like a separate clip. It's an audio clip. And the video clip and the audio clip are like two separate clips that kind of glued together by this little anchor here. But now I can extend the audio from this clip. This audio here is part of the audio associated with this clip. And if I put it over here, let's play it back.
That's what you guys just did.
Yeah.
So there's two of them. Are there any break locks being?
So I have three separate bits of audio, but if I, for instance, I really want what Sheep is saying in this centerpiece of audio, I want to listen to that and show that in my video. I really don't care about the audio in these clips. What I can do is I can reduce the audio levels in these two clips. Now, one of the things I could do is just go into this thing and then just kind of subtract the audio like that. Or I can go and take a look at that line that shows what the audio level is on the clip itself and drop that guy. And I can go do that for this guy too. And now I'm going to take this part of the audio clip from this middle piece and I'm going to stretch it all the way to the end. So now we have a contiguous piece of audio which is synced with this clip in the middle, stretching across to the beginning and stretching all the way to the end, whether you have two separate clips at the beginning and the end.
That's what you guys just did.
Yeah.
So there's two of them. So you guys should each close one.
Now let's run this a little further and see how that audio goes.
So you guys should each close one. Were there any break locks being? Did you cover? Did you cover break locks?
Not really.
Okay. So that's kind of a neat piece of dialogue, or an interesting piece of dialogue. Let's listen to Sheep.
That's what you guys just did.
Yeah.
So there's two of them. So you guys should each close one. Were there any break locks being? Did you cover break locks?
Not really.
Okay, great. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go look through this video and kind of grab some footage. And, this is kind of where you take B-roll and you kind of slather it over somebody talking. That somebody that's talking is kind of anchored to this clip. So what do we have here? We've got... So we see Sheep talking over here.
Looks like that they may have actually left.
So another interesting key I can use is, we said the space bar basically plays the clip forward. If I press the J key, it plays the clip backwards. And that lets me find kind of where an interesting spot in a clip is that I want to snag.
Looks like that they may have
I'm going to click an input point here.
actually left. Like if their backpack's still there,
So that's, Sheep trying to describe something, which is great.
don't.
He's waving his hands. That's great. I'm going to click an output point. All right, now I've selected this clip. I'm going to drag that guy over here and put it like maybe here.
So you guys should each close.
So it goes like,
So you guys should each close one. Were there any?
when you realize, oh gosh, there's some audio on here. Fine, I'm going to get rid of it. So you notice here I landed this clip on top of this clip over here, and that's okay.
So you guys should each close one. Were there any break?
Let's go back to here.
So there's two of them. So you guys should each close one. Were there any?
So I'm kind of ignoring this other clip that I put in here. I'm looking for more diverse footage.
So you guys should each close one.
Okay, that seems like something interesting. Now let's find another piece of footage of these guys all kind of looking interested and working together. Okay, let's see if that looks like sheep continuing to talk.
We have some weird tuner.
And it's a little too obvious that Bean is talking. So let's go back here. We can look at Bean fiddling around. So
Notice anything on top of making a note of it in the ticket?
How about that?
Ticket. If he is here, tell.
okay, let's grab that piece. And say put it over here. And then you notice something interesting that happened. Because the magnetic timeline is magnetic and there was a gap over here, the magnetic timeline forced this clip to land at the end of the last clip on the magnetic timeline, not at the edge of the clip that was sitting on top of it. So I have a couple of options here. I could stretch this clip, which I am actually ignoring, and run it all the way to there. The other option I can do is I can move this clip aside, take this clip, delete it, and then push this clip down into the middle there, and then let go. Then I turn the audio back down over here, and now let's see what it looks like.
So you guys should each close one. Were there any brake locks, Bean? Did you cover brake locks?
Not really.
So that's basically a little bit of audio fiddling, detaching audio as needed if you need it for, manipulating this kind of stuff, trimming clips, and laying out a timeline. So we want to do a couple more things. One is we want to put a little title piece in front, just to make sure that we can do that. I have a couple of options. So let's actually go look at titles. There's a little menu item at the top, which is the titles and generators sidebar selector at the top here. I click on it, and I get a bunch of these things. Now, I have on my computer a whole bunch of my own personal plugins that I've bought over the years. I'm going to kind of stay with basic Final Cut titles. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at this thing called lower thirds. I click on it, and I'm going to look for something called the soft bar. It's a lower third title. And if I drag this over here, you notice that it puts a title across on top of whatever footage is underneath it. And you notice this is sort of, this area here is the connect point for that clip.
That's what you guys just did.
Yeah.
So there's two of them.
And so I can click on this, and then I go into, so the minute I click on it, that's what shows up in the inspector. And so if I go in here and I go here, blah, 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 blah. This is about fonts and stuff. If I go in here, you notice it selects the text in there. So if I double click on here, I can now, you'll notice the text appears on the inspector here, and either here or in here, I can change that text. And I can select the text down here. I can say heading subtitle. And now if we play this back.
That's what you guys just did.
Yeah.
So there's two of them.
And by default, this plugin fades out the title, the lower third title that we're putting in here.
That's what you guys just did.
Yeah.
So there's two of them.
Now, there can be times where you want to just have like a blank or black background with the title on top of it, and then you cut to the actual footage in there. Now, if I want to just insert some blank space in there, I can put in what's called a slug. And a slug is basically a chunk of video that has no content, but it acts like a filler in the timeline. So I move the playhead to say the beginning, which is where I want the slug to land. And if I hold the Option key down and press W, a slug lands in here. You notice it basically pushed the entire contents of the timeline to the right and left me this chunk, which is about 25 seconds. Well, here, almost 30 seconds. I'm sorry. It's about 3 seconds. It's about 3 seconds of footage. And now I can move this over here. Now if I play it.
That's what you guys just did.
Now, if I want to shrink how long this title piece lasts, I can shrink it back to here.
That's what you guys just...
If I want to stretch the slug, I can do that here. By just extending the stuff. So any footage that has more stuff to the left and the right of it, and slugs inherently do, just as the footage we were pulling in here had stuff to the left and the right, I could stretch that footage further to the left or right, and that's kind of how I was able to pull the audio from here way to the left and to the right to expose more of it.
That's what you guys just...
Now, if I didn't want that real hard cut and I'd like to kind of fade in, dissolve into this, I can go to one of these transitions. So this thing over here is the transitions browser, and I click on that, and I have selected dissolves. I grab a cross dissolve, and I bring it across over here, and you notice as it finds anywhere it finds a join where there's two clips, it thinks maybe I should apply there. That's the snapping trying to do its work, and so I drag it to here and I let go, and it says, oh, great, I'll dissolve from this video clip to this video clip. And you'll notice this action happening up here. And what that is if there is rendering happening in Final Cut, it'll tell you by a marker that's up here. And there's a window that pops up like this that tells you what those background tasks are. Let's go play it.
That's what you guys just did.
Yeah.
So there's two of them. So you guys should each close one. Were there any break locks, Bean? Did you cover break locks?
Not really.
Okay. So, and if we wanted to fade out, you can do a cross dissolve just at the end here.
Did you cover break locks?
Not really.
So now you have essentially a project, a timeline. And you can have multiple timelines in a library. So you could work on one video, then you can work on another video using bits of the same footage. You can make a copy of this timeline. So I can take this timeline and duplicate this project. And so now I'll call this my timeline version 2. And by the way, for on a Mac, if I want to change a subject or an item, like a file name or something in Finder or inside of Final Cut here, I first select it, and then on the text, I click into it just once. And it puts me in edit mode. And then I can go ahead and modify that stuff. Now I can double click on it and bring that into my timeline. And then maybe, I don't know, make some cosmetic change. I don't know. I don't like heading title. Sheep speaks. Doghouse. When did I do this? On 11/4/2021. All right. So that's this video. Now we're done with this video. We've actually done. We've talked about everything from creating a library, importing footage, taking footage, creating a timeline, editing stuff in the timeline, doing trims, tweaking audio, and a bunch of stuff like that. And now the final thing you typically do is my video is done. Let's say my version 2 is the one that I'm going to call my finished video. I now want to render it out. I want to encode it. And so what I do is I'm going to go into here to the File menu, go to Share, and you're going to see a whole bunch of these out there. Now some of these are preset things for you, and Apple devices 4K will generate and I think it's like an M4V file container using probably H.264. I'm not 100% sure what the codec is in it. That's one way of rendering out this video. For brain dumps, I have a custom 3500 bitrate BPI bitrate MP4 container that I've kind of programmed on my computer here, and I think there is something kind of similar to this on Segundo, the Mac Pro that you guys will be using in the Cat. But you pick one of these in there, and so for now I'm going to pick the Apple devices 4K share target, which is going to determine what kind of container it's going to put this video into, and what kind of codec it's going to use for it. So I'm going to click on that, and a dialog pops up, and like you can go into settings, and it'll tell you, yeah, it's using an H.264 encode. It's going to do it at 4K, and the audio is going to be in AAC format and stuff. Okay, that's great. And now you click on Next, and it'll ask you where to put it. And what I'm going to do is I've created a folder in my movies directory called encodes. I'm going to put that on here, and it's called my first timeline version 2.0, and yeah, it's going to be an M4V file container. And so I'm going to click Save, and now it's going to render, and you can kind of see this is the render action happening up here, and if I click on it and I drag over that window into this display here, you can see the rendering, the sharing taking place where it's creating it. All right, it's done. I'm now going to pull up Finder, and I'll just get rid of this guy. And sure enough, here is the rendered video, and it's like, 40, a little under 40 megs for this thing. It's an M4V container, and I can open this with, let's say, with QuickTime Player. Drag that QuickTime window over here, and I'm going to play it.
That's what you guys just did.
Yeah.
So there's 2 of them. So you guys should each close one. Were there any break locks, Bean? Did you cover break locks?
Not really.
So that's a very gentle, basic introduction to Final Cut 10. You'll be doing a lot more complex things later, but a lot of what you learned here is what you're going to learn, is what you're going to use when you are doing brain dump videos.